Hello, I'm Alessandra Kelley, professional fine artist and amateur rock skipper. Everything humans do is art. Happenstance is what we play with. I was working on some comic book pages, like you do, and I found myself looking into the latest black and white drawing tech, basically fancy felt tip pens. When I first worked in comics and cartooning, on a totally amateur college newspaper and self-published level, nothing fancy, we used pens like these and India ink. Nib pens and India ink are good solid materials that have served illustrators well for centuries. The virtue of India ink is that it's a fairly simple material. Pine soot and lamp black, made from burning pine wood and lamp oil, hide glue, and water, sometimes with a little lacquer added to make it extra waterproof. It's good stuff. It's tough, it's waterproof, it's permanent, and it's absolutely fade-proof. It got named India ink instead of China ink because of a European misunderstanding about its source. British biochemist and historian Joseph Needham wrote, "We know that the special qualities of Chinese ink caused it to be actively sought after and imitated in many areas of the world." Needham cites Louis Lecomte, a French Jesuit missionary to China, who in the 17th century said of Chinese ink that it is most excellent, and they have hitherto vainly tried in France to imitate it. Jean-Baptiste Duhalde, another French Jesuit who compiled an encyclopedia about Chinese technology, wrote in 1735 that the Europeans have endeavored to counterfeit this ink, but without success. Needham quotes Berthold Lofer, a German-born sinologist and ethnographer of the early 20th century, who described India ink's virtues. It produces, first of all, a deep and true black, and second, it is permanent, unchangeable in color, and almost indestructible. Chinese written documents may be soaked in water for several weeks without washing out. In documents written as far back as the Han Dynasty, the ink is as bright and well preserved as though it had been applied but yesterday. But you know, technology advances, and some of it is pretty useful. And when you get down to it, dealing with nib pens and fountain pens and bottles of India ink and cleaning up after them is kind of a pain in the tuchus. So I moseyed on over to the local art emporium and discovered whole ranges of art pens aimed at artists and illustrators. Fortunately, a lot of these new felt tip pens use permanent inks, but not all of them do, and it's not always clear which is which. It's an excellent idea to test the pens you're thinking of using before you make art with them. Here's a way to make a fade test for pens. This sort of test has continuous strips of ink which are partly covered and partly exposed to the sun. After a time, usually at least a month, the page is unfolded to check how the covered ink looks compared to the exposed ink. Truly permanent ink will show no change. Anything that shows any change is fugitive and not suitable for artworks which are meant to last. I took some Bristol board, but you can use any thick paper or card. The size isn't too important, you just need it to be convenient to handle. I folded up 4 inches of the card like this to cover most of the rest of it, leaving some exposed so the sun can shine on it. I scored the Bristol board first to help it fold smoothly. I took a pencil and a straight edge and marked a 1/2 inch at the top and bottom to leave space for notes. Then I ruled stripes 1 centimeter wide. Don't get me started on metric rulers. They're really hard to find in the US. You'll notice this ruler still has inches on it, and the centimeter side is thicker and less precise, too. To make a test, fill in every other stripe with 1 layer of ink as smoothly drawn as you can. There will often be a little overlap between pen strokes, don't worry about it. Label which stripe comes from which pen. Do be sure to date the card. Fold up the flap and tape it shut. I like to weight it down a little bit by taping it to some corrugated cardboard, sandwiching it with another piece over the flap so sunlight won't leak in. Then put it on a sunny windowsill for a few months and just walk away and leave it. 2 years ago, I made 2 test sheets on thick drawing paper and left them out on a sunny windowsill. I could see where they were going within 2 weeks, and I don't think they changed appreciably after the first 2 months. On the first sheet, I tested wide pens meant to fill spaces. The Copic Sketch 100, the Copic Classic 100, the Copic Multiliner SPBS, the Sakura Pigma Professional Brush BB, the Sakura Pigma Graphic 3, and the Sakura Pigma Brush. I had a couple of strips left over, so I did one with 2 layers of the Copic Classic 100 and one with 2 layers of the Sakura Pigma Professional Brush BB. When you look at the back of the paper, and it's pretty thick paper, only the Copic Classic 100 and the Copic Sketch 100 bled through. The other inks were better behaved. The second test sheet included a mix of broad filler and fine line pens. The Faber-Castell Pitt Artist's Pen, size B, the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen, size M, the Prismacolor Premier Fine Line Marker, size 08, the Artist's Loft, size 08, and the Sakura Pigma Professional Brush BB, first with a single layer and then with 2 layers. Most of the inks had a matte finish. The Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen had a little shine, especially where pen strokes overlapped. The Artist's Loft, which was a store brand and difficult and dryish to work with, produced a noticeably shiny and scratchy black. Initially, most of the inks looked about the same black. The ink of the Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Pen was somewhat darker, as was the Prismacolor Premier Fine Line Marker. However, the difference was small, and 2 layers of most of the other pens easily matched 1 layer of the darker inks. The Artist's Loft pen ink was and remained a little weedy and pale and noticeably shiny. The 100 ink in the Copic markers was noticeably different from all the others, deeper, richer, darker, bluer, and smoother. It looked better than the other inks when first put down on the paper at the start of the test. Then I left the test pages out. When you look at the test pages after 2 years of sunlight, most of the drawing pens held up pretty well. The only failure was the Copic 100 markers. They were the ones with the intense bluish black that initially looked deeper and richer than most of the other inks. They're also the only markers that bled through the paper. After just a few days in the sun, it began to be apparent that they were losing their oomph. 2 weeks in, they were noticeably faded. By 1 month of sun, they were phantoms. It would appear that the Copic 100 markers use a dye-based ink that looks good at first, but does not last. I just want to make clear that the Copic Multiliner SPBS brush passed the test. It's not the same as the Copic 100 markers. It did just fine and resisted fading. Setting the Copic 100 markers aside, the rest of the pens all held up about equally well to the fade test. The main difference, I think, is that the cheaper store brand pen was scratchier and less pleasant to work with than the others. Its ink still held up to the sun just fine. Testing art materials is important. You don't want to find out that that good-looking black marker you've made your drawing with fades away to a grayish smudge after just a little daylight. Once you've found reliably permanent pens, you can play with them, knowing that your work has a better chance of lasting the ages. So yeah,